I shall forbear farther particulars, for it were endless to enumerate all the complaints amongst their own authors, in whom there were any relics of candour and conscience, of the fictions in this kind, and the many notable instances of those impious frauds discovered upon the reformation of religion, which before that time were reputed such certain miracles, that it was sufficient to make a man an heretic to doubt of the truth of them. I shall add only this, that our adversaries could not possibly do a greater spite to Christianity, nor a greater dishonor to those illustrious and unquestionable miracles done by Christ and his apostles in the face of all the world, so as their greatest enemies were forced to acknowledge the verity of them, than to compare with them, and equal to them, their fabulous relations concerning some seeming wonders commonly done in a corner, and by such who served their own interest in them, and whose evidence was so dark that the truth of them was questioned by their own friends, as you have now heard, as if their design were to make good that passage of one of their holy fathers, who called the gospel fabula Christi, the fable of Christ. In that known expression, how great riches hath this fable of Christ procured to us. But if every syllable of what their fabulists have recorded of their miracles were true, it will stand them in little stead, for the reasons before alleged and proved. And therefore I conclude that the miracles pretended or done by papists are no certain and sufficient evidence of their infallibility, and no solid foundation for their faith. Section 22. Answer 6. To which I shall only add this word of parting, that if miracles must pass for arguments, I know no reason, but Protestants have as good a title to them as the Church of Rome. For although we do not use to boast of wonders, nor indeed have any need to use that argument, having such solid evidence and sufficient ground for our faith in the Holy Scriptures, yet if our adversaries will force us to it, I think our plea is as just as theirs, and we could very easily fill a volume, not with such fictitious narrations as they stuff their legends with, but with undoubted histories of Protestant wonders. If the ancients esteem the first propagation of Christianity by such contemptible means against such potent and universal opposition an eminent miracle, why may we not reckon this for a miracle, that the reformation of religion should be carried on by a despicable monk, in despite of all the power, policy, cruelty, flattery, learning of the last age? We can tell them of miraculous cures of diseases and dispossessions of devils by the prayers of God's people, of certain predictions of future contingencies by Protestant ministers, of miraculous preservations and deliverances of Protestant princes and ministers from the bloody rage and deep designs of papists, of eminent and unusual judgments of God upon popish prosecutors. Of all these there are remarkable instances already extant in print, and such as the papists were never able to disprove to this day. So that the Protestant cause is not inferior to the Romish in this particular. But only here are two things evident in Protestants, which are not so in their adversaries. That is, first, the modesty of the Protestants, that they do not boast of what they might justly plead. Secondly, the auta vicia, or self-sufficiency, of the Protestant cause, that hath evidence enough in Scripture, and hath arguments enough and to spare, whereas the penury of the popish cause forceth them to catch at shadows for want of substance. Section 23. Thus I have considered the several pretenses of their great doctors, and all the pillars upon which this vast structure of the Church's infallibility depends. I have stated the several pretensions in the word of their own most approved authors. I have weighed, I think I may say, all their considerable arguments by which they seek to maintain them in the balance of the sanctuary, and have found them light. I shall close this particular with a brief reflection upon the whole matter, and the diverse and repugnant courses of their learned authors in the resolution and foundation of their faith, wherein we shall see these miserable creatures running, like the false prophet in Jeremy, from chamber to chamber to hide themselves. First, they made a bold venture at Scripture, and fairly offered to try their cause by it, for which they deserve this motto, Magnus tamen excidit ausis. But their own brethren pulled them by the ear, and told them that they would not do their work. Gainsayers can never be convinced out of Scripture, therefore you must confound them with tradition, says their great Salmeron. And they soon found that to be true, which once a popish clergyman which once a popish clergyman said when he had found a Bible, he knew not was the author of it, but sure he was it was some pestilent heretic, for he everywhere condemns the doctrines of our church. Secondly, they fly to the fathers and their infallible authority. There, upon a fair trial, they are beaten out of the field. Upon debate they find the fathers so Anglo-Hurosalans, so uncertain in some things, so positive against them in other things, that they presently cry crucifige to those whose ears had rung with hosannas before, and down goes the infallibility of the fathers, and to fetch in miracles that they may not want arguments. Thirdly, then they fly to councils, and by all means they must be infallible. Well, the Protestants follow them thither. That point comes to be scanned. Instances are given of the errors of councils, if either Papists or Protestants may be judges, and which had the greatest hand in the deposing of councils. Several notable passages are alleged out of the councils against the Pope's supremacy, and diverse of the present doctrines of the Romish Church. And upon the hearing of the cause, the Pope himself, and the most of the learned and considerable Papists now in the world, are resolved to trust councils no longer with this jewel, and not content to deny, they dispute down the infallibility of councils, as I have showed. Fourthly, then they fly to the Pope for help, and Jesuits cry out, Eugeka, they have found the man that is infallible. Now faltat senex, salva res est. Well, the Protestants join issue with them upon that, give many shrewd instances of the errors of popes, allege the express words of Adrianus Sextus, a pope confessing the fallibility of popes, whom Bellarmine himself reckons among those that hold that the Pope may be an heretic and teach heresy. And besides all this, 2 popish approved councils are pleaded, that is, Constance and Basil, who absolutely deny the Pope's supremacy and infallibility. Well, what shall they do next? Fifthly, then there must be another device, a coalition of Pope and Council, and those meeting together are infallible. Thus infallibility is a short-lived business, and dies at the expiration of the council. For when they are dissolved, their writings, as well as those of Holy Scripture, are incapable of being a judge. And thus they have devised an infallibility made of a commixtion of 2 fallibles, an ingenious invention. It is by which one may make an infinite of 2 finites, and of 2 guilty persons make up 1 innocent. But this also is destroyed by themselves. For although the divided parties seem to patch up an agreement, yet indeed they are as much at variance as ever. For the Jesuits make the Pope alone infallible, and the Council only in dependence upon him, and their adversaries ascribe this infallibility to the Council alone, and to the Pope only by communication from them. And so they are both gone by the arguments already mentioned under each of those heads, and if we may believe either, there is security in neither. And besides all these, diverse of their late learned writers reject the infallibility, both of Pope and Councils, as White, Holden, Cressy, St. Kenelme Digby, etc., who assert that neither one nor other are further infallible. Then they keep the golden rule of tradition, and in that sense every Christian, that is, so far as he keeps to tradition, is infallible. Sixthly, the next device is oral tradition, and the authority of the present Church, who are therefore right, because they say so. So this is a confirmation of their faith, answerable to this confutation, who answered all Bellarmine's works, with saying, Metiris Bellarmine? Bellarmine, thou liest. In like manner do these men confute all the Protestant writers, and maintain their own tenets, by saying, Recte dictis Domine Papa, or Mater Ecclesia, that the Pope and present Church are in the right. Thus their bare assertion must pass for a solid demonstration, and their pretense that they hold nothing but what they had from the apostles must be admitted as a proof that it is so, and shadows must go for substances. But this, besides the ridiculousness of begging the question and craving what they cannot prove, is denied by the greatest pillars of their own church, and such as with whom the authors of this new and wild fancy will not compare themselves, either for number or quality. For this is the known and most approved doctrine of the Church of Rome, that tradition and Scripture both are two dead letters, and partial rules, and there is besides these required a living judge endowed with supreme and infallible authority, and without this judge we cannot infallibly understand, and are not bound to receive and believe either the one or the other. Seventh, at last they are so hard put to it that they cannot leap out of the circle, nor extricate themselves out of that labyrinth in which their conceit of infallibility hath involved them, without miracles. In come the marks of the church, and the glory of miracles. And thus far I shall discharge them from that invincible difficulty of proving the truth of their most famous miracles. For if they can prove the infallibility of their church, I will give it under my hand that they can work a miracle. For then they can reconcile contradictions, and they can do that which the ineffectual essays of all their greatest wits have showed to be above the wit of man, or devil either. For doubtless those popes who had familiar acquaintance with the devil would not fail to take in his advice and assistance for the defense of their infallibility. And therefore you must needs be acknowledged for the theuma tergai, or workers of miracles. Thus I have dispatched their several pretenses, and showed the nullity of them all, and consequently the nullity of their faith.